The impact of climate change on our development will be severe unless we act now.
So, what can we do now? India thus needs to take a threefold challenge of building economic resilience while reducing our carbon emissions and focusing on restoring the environment.
We need to take a low carbon, green development approach where we rethink the development planning and propose structural solutions which can lower our carbon emissions. The political profile of green issues is higher than ever. The cost of renewable is falling fast. It can ensure efficient and inclusive progress without harming the security and well-being of our future generations.
This is where individuals and communities have a very important role to play in this transformation. And one of the ways we can adopt sustainable lifestyles are by refusing to buy unless we really need, reducing our consumption, reusing goods, and recycling them to avoid wastage and emissions.
Restoring of ecosystems is the theme for this Environment Day. Ecological restoration aims to recreate or accelerate the recovery of an ecosystem that has already been disturbed. For example, it is observed that during cyclones, areas near mangroves face relatively less damage than completely exposed areas. Flooding damages are less where there is riparian vegetation and where river networks are not disturbed, and so on.
And that is why a green economic model which includes such priorities can ensure improved human well-being, social equality, while significantly reducing the environmental risks. It is an upgrade over the current GDP-based economic model that entices growth within an economy but cannot necessarily account for human well-being and environmental risks. This will need a proactive approach from scientists, citizens, governments, and businesses. And we at CCP understand this and are trying to reach out to important stakeholders using diverse means, such as publishing policy papers for policy advisory. Last year, we published a paper making PMR carbon neutral by 2030 to highlight the role of urban areas in climate action and how profitable it will be for this entire region of PMR. A policy paper for green economic recovery of Maharashtra, highlighting the steps that we need to take at a state level to adopt low carbon and green developmental pathways.
And in order to make people aware of the climate impacts, we at CCP also published our first e-magazine called EcoFusion. EcoFusion seeks to understand the imperative connection between the planet, the people, and the profits.
In addition to writing and publishing our e-magazine, we also write blogs on various aspects of climate action that are relevant and easy to understand for all. And we would encourage you to come onto our platform and contribute by sharing your experiences.
The foundation of climate action is getting together and forming meaningful organizations which can act and implement climate-friendly solutions to forge a larger impact. Climate Collective Pune is one such organization. So we invite you to join us in CCP and let's tackle climate change together.
Good evening, everyone. It is 6 p.m. and we'll start our event now. I welcome you all to the World Environment Day Talks 2021. I'm Aditi from Pune International Center. Before we begin, I request the participants to please keep videos and microphones on off or mute mode for better network. Any questions or comments may please be shared using Zoom chat option at any time. We will consolidate them for the question answer session at the end of the talks. This event is being broadcasted live on the CCP YouTube channel and will be recorded for sharing on other platforms. Pune International Center is a think tank that focuses on policy research and advisory for adding value to the national and international discourse on public policy issues. Climate Collective Pune is a knowledge-sharing group working on climate action initiated under the aegis of EECC program of PIC, which is led by Professor Amitav Malik. PIC organizes talks dedicated to World Environment Day every year, and this is the 4th year. The theme for today's discussion is green development. Here we'll explore ways in which humanity can coexist with nature while attempting to meet needs of both simultaneously. Given the diverse range of issues, environment is a mainstream concern now and involves all aspects of human society and governance. We are lucky to have distinguished economists Dr. Ejaz Ghani and Dr. Gurudas Nulkar on the panel today. The discussion will be chaired by Professor Amitav Malik, founding member and trustee, Pune International Center. Professor Amitav Malik, a Padma Shri awardee, has been a defense scientist for 35 years and a member of NSAB for 3 successive years. He has authored several books on technology, national security, and energy. He has been committedly working in energy, environment, and climate change for the past 2 decades and initiated the EECC program at PIC since 2018. I now request Professor Amitav Malik to give the introductory talk. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Good evening, Namaskar. Let me add my 2 words of welcome and also greetings of the Environment Day 2021, which was yesterday. We, of course, deliberately keep our function the next day because on the particular 5th of June, there are too many webinars, too many meetings. So once again, welcome. It's very appropriate that I start by remembering the last year's Environment Day. We created a climate economic dialogue, and it was attended by a large number of people, including our President, Dr. Mashelkar, and our Vice President, Dr. Vijay Kelkar. So this year, you will see that we have continued our focus on climate economics with a wish or with a hope that we will be able to drive this thought process that environment and economy are not two sides of they are not against each other. They are in fact two sides of the same coin. We continued with this process. In January this year, we conducted a climate economic conference, well attended, and today's theme for the Environment Day 21 talks is the green economy, whether it's a challenge or whether it's an opportunity. So let me begin by welcoming everybody all over again, particularly Dr. Ejaz Ghani and Dr. Gurudas Nulkar. Let me take a few minutes to share some of my thoughts, just to set the tone, just set the background. So we are looking at our country. We are already the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter. We'll probably be the largest greenhouse gas emitter, largest polluter by 2050 if we don't change our ways of doing things. Paris commitment that we made in 2015 were very impressive. We followed it up by some grand scheme in renewable energy and so on and so forth. But to be honest, there is no strategic advisory at the state level as to what each state must do by what time. That is still awaiting. Having said that, even if we all globally fulfill our own commitments at the Paris, that will not be adequate for containing the global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade. So, on the other hand, India is still on a very steep growth curve. Our electrical energy requirement will be going on up steadily. In addition, the government of India's initiative for the electrical vehicle, they will add to the charging requirement. Ideally, the charging station for electrical vehicles should be from renewable energy, solar or whatever. But until that happens, it will keep on loading the conventional grid, which today we are at a mix of maybe 30% of renewable and 70% of the fossil fuel. In short 20-30 years, we have to reverse this, and that's a big challenge. Unfortunately, politically and culturally, we are still striving for the Western ideals of affluence, richness, money. And even so, if we decide to quickly adapt to every means for getting carbon neutral or net carbon neutral, even then, I think the time is very short. IPCC has already said that this decade, up to 2030, will be a decisive decade, which will determine the next few decades to come and where will we be. So energy environment, therefore, must find synergy together and with the economy. Otherwise, the motivation for change will not come. Having said that, we are really looking for a transformation to a new economy. That new economy, to begin with, may be inconvenient for the super rich, super affluent for a while. But we all feel, as scientists, as researchers, that that new economy will be much more robust, much more resilient, and therefore it will be future ready, because the future is going to be even more uncertain with all kinds of interruptions. We've already seen how the pandemic has completely put economic mechanism on hold. So which means that when livelihood and life are in danger, people forget about everything else. Same thing might happen with climate change, climate impacts. Same thing might happen by technological innovation, robotics, AI. So we are going into a future that's going to be very uncertain. And therefore, all the more reason we need to make this major transition within this next 10, 15 years. However, the mindsets have to change to recognize real values. Today, our values are measured by GDP. Unfortunately, that was a concept of the pre-war around that time, and that concept is not really serving the purpose. So maybe it's time that we try to look for indicators that will be real indicators of either progress, happiness, satisfaction, and so on and so forth. Therefore, radical changes are required. And of course, the youth is the real player, stakeholder in the whole game. And if we don't do what's required in the next 10, 20 years, the same youth of today will face dire consequences, not to mention the future generations that will have very difficult future. So I think this is the context in which we are looking at green development. It's no longer a choice, really. I feel it is almost an imperative. And the more smoothly that we do this green development transition will be one of the main key components of the economic transition as well. So let me kind of stop here and welcome everybody all over again. Aditi, will you take over from me?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for highlighting the importance not just of the Environment Day, but how it's important, what actions we take in this decade. We will now shift to the talks for the day. Our first speaker is Dr. Ejaz Ghani, who is a senior fellow with Pune International Center and a former lead economist at the World Bank. He worked at ILO and UN organizations like UNCTAD and UNICEF prior to joining World Bank, and taught economics at Oxford University and Delhi University. He also writes on diverse topics like green growth, macro policies, urbanization, and agriculture. I invite Dr. Ghani to give his talk on the challenges of rapid green development in India.
Okay, do I need to do anything to get back on the video?
No, sir, you are visible and audible as well.
Okay, thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Professor Amitabh Malik, and thank you for the videos that were shown. That's extremely inspiring. And that inspiration made me think that, just to give you the background, I'm from Bihar. How are we going to achieve this goal from the lens of the most lagging state in India? And what advice can we give to Ministry of Finance and Niti Aayog. I mean, that's a broad framework in which I want to think, but not lose sight of the fact that I'm from Bihar, the least developed state. And how do we achieve the highest goals that Professor Amitabh Malik has set? So let me start by defining green growth so that it reduces the conflict between growth and the green environment. One way of looking at green growth is the efficiency with which we use all our natural resources, including land, labor, energy, forest. That's an economist way of thinking. And that green growth should be sustainable and socially inclusive, both for the lagging regions and the leading regions in India. Why is this important? This is important given that India is the most land scarce country in the world, but it also has the youngest demographics compared to aging population in China and USA. So that makes India stand out. Young people want green growth agenda. That naturally takes us to, how well has India performed on green growth in the last decade? And there, one of the key agenda being, which Mr. Biden is now pushing, which as he has now joined the Paris Climate Agreement, is the energy agenda, which is likely to come up. And energy accounts for 70% of the carbon emissions. So we picked up the annual survey data of millions of enterprises in India in 600 districts. And those enterprises asked the question, how much labor, capital, energy you have used. And we found that the overall trend on energy efficiency, which is the amount of energy used to produce a unit of output, has improved in India. And the energy intensity of output is lower in India compared to China. So those are good points about India, that we are making progress. But when we open up India, there are diverging stories that emerge. Urban areas have improved energy efficiency. So all the enterprises, manufacturing enterprises in Pune, Bombay, Calcutta, they have improved energy efficiency. They use less energy to produce a unit of output. But it has worsened in the lagging regions. The unfortunate thing is that the manufacturing enterprises, which we want to expand, are moving out of congested mega cities because it's too expensive. And they're moving into rural areas. And they don't have the infrastructure. And there we find that the energy efficiency has worsened. But we can't stop that spatial development. So there is a conflict that is developing in India between deurbanization of the manufacturing sector and the worsening environment. There are ways out of it, and we'll discuss that on how to face the challenges. Besides the energy efficiency where we are getting diverging trends, we also see that the air pollution in India is probably one of the worst in the world. The most polluted cities in the world are in India, and there are many reasons for it. Construction, congestion, and I'll not going to go into it. There are many reasons why cities get congested. The key issue is, once again, I'll pose myself, the ideals and goals that Professor Amitabh Malik has set. And for states like Bihar and UP, how will they achieve this? And there, I think the key agenda is that India is going to make double its infrastructure investments during the next decade. Nothing is going to stop it because India needs to scale up infrastructure investments to keep up with the pace of urbanization, structural transformation, spatial development, and the increasing basic needs of the people. So the challenge for us is, what are the policy options that are going to promote growth and be least harmful for the environment? The first suggestion is, we have made progress on the environment in urban areas in some aspects on energy, but not on air pollution. But a bigger challenge is in the rural areas. The future driver of growth in India will no longer be in urban areas, but in rural areas. Land is the most scarce commodity in India. So we need to scale up rural infrastructure investments. That's where energy efficiency has worsened. Basic needs are not there. So this policy option of scaling up rural infrastructure investment should get the highest priority by the policymakers to achieve the environmental goals. But just scaling up rural infrastructure investments will not achieve the environmental goals. Let me elaborate on this. Enterprises, large manufacturing enterprises use three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Land is the natural resource. And we asked, using data, millions of enterprises in 600 districts in India, from annual surveys by the government of India, which factor is most distorted, land, labor, or capital? And we found that land is much more distorted than other factors of production. And less efficient manufacturing enterprises move from urban areas to rural areas and grab the land. And because land is used as a collateral for bank loans, the bank loans also get distorted. So India is facing the twin balance sheet problem. So the twin balance sheet problem and the environmental problem is the same, because land markets are distorted. So we need to liberalize, remove these distortions, which will promote both growth and good environment, because more efficient enterprises will use natural resources more efficiently. But these goals are not easy to achieve. There are huge financing needs. And in order to meet these financing needs, the policymakers will need to coordinate at the center, state, private, public, domestic, global, at all levels. Unfortunately, the global environmental institutions are still small and complex. They're still evolving. There's not much global financing we are getting yet to achieve the goals that Professor Amitabh Malik has set. But, there is the private equity funds which can also be tapped. The green bank loans, green bonds, green FDI investments, they are rising. Because the steady revenue stream will continue. India provides a huge market with the rising middle class to 500 million people and the increased awareness about the environment. There's going to be a huge inflow of investments. How can this be promoted? The global trade agenda at the WTO is still bogged down. They had proposed, free transfer of green technology, not yet. developing countries feel, sidelined in the global trade agenda. That needs to be improved. But above all, India, Niti Aayog and Ministry of Finance and we and Bihar needs a green growth strategy first. And I'm very happy to see that Maharashtra and the state is proceeding with the green growth agenda. I think that's critical. And I have discussed some pillars of what the green growth agenda should be. I've shared a paper, and let me stop here. I think, I have learned a great deal and got more inspired by this discussion, and we'll keep this going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll now, it was a very elaborate talk and highlighting the main problems or challenges which our green development strategies will have. We will now look at the potential for green development. Our next speaker, Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, is a trustee and faculty at the Ecological Society, Pune. He heads the Strategy and General Management Department at Symbiosis Center for Management. His research interests include industrial ecology, environmental sustainability, and green business. He has authored several books, including the recently published Anartha Shastra, which has won the State Literary Award for 2021 for economics category. He is also a Climate Collective Pune member. I request Dr. Nulkar to share his talk on the potential for green development in India.
Thank you so much to the PIC team, Professor Amitabh Malik, Aditi Kale, and the entire backend team. Thank you, Dr. Ijaz, for setting the tone right. I think it was very good to hear of the kind of research that you have undertaken. I hope you can hear me. I just would like to share. Just let me know when you are able to see my screen.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah, okay. So, so Dr. Ijaz has spoken about the growth part of it and the economic growth, especially for less developed regions, what could be the way ahead, and that question still remains, which needs to be answered in many ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the green part of the development, which is one part of the green development agenda. So the flow is I'll very quickly talk about breaking down the green development and what is impeding green development today. Unless we know the root cause of the problem, we are not able to give solutions that are efficient and effective. So and then I'll talk about restructuring for green development and measuring green development. And the argument which I'm going to make is that today India is very poorly structured for green development, and let me get to that point here. So sustainable development, as you all know, is the green development is a component of sustainable development, and sustainable development has two components. The one part of sustainability is the social part, and the second is the green or the ecological part, of which I'm going to speak. And the part about development also has two parts, which is the quantitative part, which implies growth, economic growth, as well as the rate of change, what kind of change in the processes and the institutions that we need to make, and the qualitative indicators of development, which are not measured directly by quantitative indicators, but are qualitative in nature. So the green development problem is what we are going to look at is this part of it that you can see on the screen right now. Let me see if I can pick up the laser pointer. Yeah. So this part is what you can, I'm going to define green development as. It will have a component of quantitative growth and it will have a component of qualitative growth. Right. But like I said, to understand what is it that is impeding green development today, we will first need to know how is green development structured today, and then look at what are the impediments to green development. So the current model of green, look at the current model of green, and we hear a lot of companies talking about sustainability, greening, so on and so forth. Actually, there are no limits to natural resource use today, and there is no limit to consuming a renewable resource or a non-renewable resource, right? That's the free market economy that we have adopted. There are no limits to pollution. It is discouraged by regulation, and by taxation, but there is theoretically no limit to pollution. There is no obligation for industry to reuse, recycle, repair, to reduce their resources. Of course, they're getting more energy efficient because that is the way to profitability. But there is a whole chunk of reuse, recycle, repair, which is forgotten by the industry in the times of hyper competition. And there is no control on what is produced. And I'm going to come to this again. The current model of development, on the other hand, is structured squarely upon the free market economy, right? From Adam Smith times, we have thought about the market is the best governor of what is produced and what is not produced in the country. The people place a demand, and those which are in demand are getting manufactured, and those which are not fall apart. So free market economy is what we have relied upon since Nehru's times. And that we assume is going to so this is therefore the arrows show that this is the way that we look at development as a model today. So what are the limitations of the free market model? And they are fairly well known, but I'm just picking up a few of the ones which are in development as well as green. And of course, we have a lot of market failures. But the first market failure is what Garrett Hardin called as the tragedy of commons. Because natural resources are not owned by any company or any one being, they are the natural resource of a country, then there is over extraction. And we know exactly what kind of over extraction. If you go to the Department of Mines, which is, the Ministry of Mines, the Department of Natural Resources has a list of mines which are completely exhausted today in India. You know, you have pages and pages of list of mines which is exhausted. That's because of over extraction. Tragedy of the common. The second failure is the externalized costs of manufacturing and consumption. And that is something which economists all over the world have not been able to deal, right? From Arthur Cecil Pigu's time, when he proposed the Piguvian taxes or the pollution taxes, environmental taxes, right to up to the modern times of Robert Coase, who suggested the bargaining power of free markets in terms of externalized cost and the reciprocal theory. But the externalized cost is something, again, which a problem is not solved. Inequality is something which is built into the economic engine today. And the reason is very simple to see. As Thomas Piketty says, you know, R is greater than C, which means the rate of generation of capital is greater than the rate of the GDP growth. That means the wealth is concentrating in the hands of a few. That's also something which is proven by numbers. The fourth failure of the free market economy has been the natural resources distribution. Right? And the classic problem of where do you want to use the steel? Do you want to make more hospital beds in primary health centers in Bihar and rural India? Or do you want to use it to make more SUVs and cars and Formula One racing? Now, again, there is no control, and the free market economy is free to choose what it is to be done. And the last one is the jobless growth. And we have seen this in multiple economies. The rate of growth of GDP has not been commensurate with the rate of growth of job creation. And that is simply because of one thing, which is automation. Every technology that we bring reduces the labor input into the industry. And that's, of course, important for industries because that reduces cost, that increases repeatability, that gives a 24-hour, with automation, you can work for 24 hours. With human labor, you can work only for 8 hours. They need to go and rest. They make mistakes in repetitiveness, so on and so forth. So these are the well discussed market failures which are there. And these are exactly the impediments, not just to development, but also to green. You know, the tragedy of commons has resulted in India, has resulted in open cast mines and loss of forest, pollution of water bodies, externalized costs. You know, the kind of pollution which is going into the Ganges today, the Ganga, and all the other rivers, even the peninsular rivers, is pathetic. I mean, we have turned our rivers into sewage channels. That's it, nothing else. Inequality is increasing pollution. We know exactly how people in Dharavi are living, the conditions which they are living, and the kind of sewage and the waste management which is there, it's abysmal, to say the least. Natural resource distribution has skewed tremendously, and that is causing a difference between the haves and have-nots. So it's leading to social unrest. It's leading to the dilemma of how much carbon output per capita is the underdeveloped people want and the people who are in the developed countries want. It's a classic case of inequality. And jobless growth, of course, has led to a lot of jobs being destroyed. The jobs which were low carbon jobs, right? Jobs which are manual oriented are being destroyed because of energy intensive technologies. So what is the current model of what are the outcomes of this? And again, the outcomes are fairly easy to see. Climate change, over extraction and mining leading to forest cover loss. This is very, very clearly seen in a country like India. The Hubli railway, which is coming up, the Chhattisgarh forests, which have been renewed, Molem National Park in Goa is going over into mines. Large dams, they are less easy to see, but large dams have caused a loss of the riverine ecosystems in India. Green development just cannot come into play if you do not look at your rivers in a holistic manner. Intensive farming and the overuse of water. We know so many places in India which are starved of water, and they were not starved of water a few years back. This is because of our cropping systems. Our traditional cropping methods have given way to intensive farming. Intensive farming and the overuse of chemicals. Groundwater pollution has become a big issue. Arsenic poisoning in drinking water has become a big issue, especially in some districts where there are strains of arsenic which are being exposed by fertilizer use. Biodiversity loss and zoonotic diseases. This is clearly a case that every one of us is facing today. COVID-19, SARS, MERS, swine flu, each and every new disease which has come up in the last couple of decades has moved from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom. And that is mainly because of the loss of biodiversity and loss of habitat which they have had. Animal farming and greenhouse gases. Now, this is again something which is debatable, but in a country like India and the United States, where there is intensive farming of animals, this has led to excessive emissions of greenhouse gases. Poverty and pollution, all of that. So what is the current development model? How are we looking at green development today? We are looking at excessive growth of fossil fuel through environmental regulation and taxation, which is not enough, so to say. Over extraction and mining, there is a compensatory mechanism, right? So compensatory afforestation, compensatory mechanism for people who are displaced with it. About large dams, we have policies which are conducive to large dams. So we want more large dams at the cost of riverine ecosystems. For intensive farming, there are no restraints. In fact, it is subsidized. Overuse of water is subsidized. Exactly. Sugarcane is subsidized, and that is what I'm saying. We are subsidizing overuse of water because a lot of places in India are not suitable for sugarcane farming, and yet they get subsidies and they farm sugar. So there are again no restraints to the overuse of chemicals. Again, fertilizer industry is subsidized, so it is encouraged. This is our current model of green development. Biodiversity loss and zoonotic diseases. We have a Biodiversity Act, we have a Forest Protection Act, we have a Wildlife Protection Act, but again, it's restricted to one ministry with very, very weak enforcement mechanism. Energy intensive production and depletion of non-renewable resources, there is no restriction at all. There are no restraints anywhere. Animal farming and greenhouse gases, again, there are subsidies and there are no restraints. Poverty, lot of subsidy. So the current green development model is ill-equipped to deal with the green development that we are actually talking about. If you look at all the ministries which are involved in this mechanism, you have the Ministry of Environment, multiple ministries which are not designed to cooperate and co-work with each other. This has been a problem which India is facing for a very long time. They were not designed to cooperate. If you break this list of ministries into two lists, the first list is actually a very short list of two ministries who are responsible for green part of it. On the other hand, all the other ministries which you see on the right-hand side are designed for growth. That is the primary agenda of each of these ministries. There is a component of sustainability. There is a component of greening in that, but that is a subsidiary, it's a secondary objective. The primary objective of the Ministry of Coal is growth. The primary objective of Ministry of Commerce and Industry is growth. The primary objective of heavy industry is agriculture. It's all growth. So you can see this, the balance is squarely in favor of economic growth. Growth, like I said earlier, is important. We need money for development. So economic growth is important. But the way economic growth is happening today with the market failures that I just discussed is not the way ahead, is what I'm arguing. There is a bridge in between, and that bridge is given by the Niti Aayog, again, which does not have jurisdiction over what each of the ministries is doing, but it's more of a planning and a top think tank. And then we have the National Green Tribunal to support. 4 zones, east, west, north, south, again, ill-equipped to deal with the issues of green development, the issues of environmental destruction, the issues of pollution. So the way ahead. So what are the thoughts on restructuring for green development? On one hand, on the left-hand side, the first and foremost change that must be made is in the education system. We have
I think Gurudas sir is.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
sir. Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have no idea why I was booted out or how I was booted out.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. So coming back to where I left off, right? So education is the first thing which we must change. School education is abysmally pathetic. We have not spent enough money on school education. We are leaving our children to people who don't look at teaching as a career, but they look at teaching as an alternative to employment, right? The least salaries, the least wages are there for primary school teachers. It's just not possible to leave our children and our future citizens of India to people who do not have a clue on what is good education, on how do you teach, the manners of teaching. We have invested a lot of money in IITs, NIDs, ICERs, IIMs, all of that. But we have completely overlooked primary school education, which is where the basic level of ecological thinking can be inculcated. Economic reform, subsidies and incentives, trades. So subsidies and incentives have to be rethought of for green development. We cannot continue giving subsidies to things which are against green development. These are some things which must be restructured for that. Green industrial ecosystem. Today, we do not have an ecosystem which encourages reuse of raw material. We have multiple taxation. People who want, industries who want to, oops, I'm sorry. I am not sharing my screen, right?
I was just going to remind you that I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Tell me when you can see.
Yeah. Okay.
That's visible now.
Yeah, sorry. So back again at the slide. Again, I was going through green industrial ecosystem. Our taxation system, take taxation system. It is not designed to encourage reuse of raw materials, reuse of scrap, reuse of material. Take back. A while ago, Godrej Industries was contemplating on taking back their old refrigerators. Godrej refrigerators are working in India for 30 years, 40 years, and people want to upgrade their refrigerators. Godrej said, we will take back our old refrigerators, use the copper, use stuff which is usable, and we will refurnish in the next new technology, next generation refrigerator. It's not possible because of the taxation system in India. That must be changed. So green industrial ecosystem, green economic zones. We have SEZs for a very long time. Why can we not have GEZs, which are promoting circular economy, so on and so forth? Reskilling and training of human capital is something which is...
Can I call you after 1 hour?
Reskilling and training of human capital is something which is so important for the green development that is not thought of. We cannot get into green development with the same capabilities and competencies that we have today. Those are good for efficiencies, for carbon intensive technologies, but they are not designed for low carbon technologies. They're not designed where we are looking at growth through renewable resources. Yeah, and on the right hand side, the first thing is about governance. Today, where do we have, after giving the vote, after dropping your vote in the vote box for 5 years, you have no access to anything which the government is doing. We need a participative, decentralized democracy to be able to really get onto the paradigm of green growth. Planning, localized planning is something which is so important in green development. Looking at the agroclimatic zones, looking at the biophysical resource allocation to that piece of land, and then making a plan for that. Since 1950 to till very recently, we have been looking at central planning. Nikita Khrushchev's model, which was suitable for Russia, was not suitable for India. You cannot have one single 5-year plan for the entire country. Ladakh is so different from Arunachal Pradesh. Kutch is so different from Kanyakumari. All these are different agroclimatic zones. All these have different biophysical resources. Alignment between ministries, something which is completely lacking today, what I just talked about, and alignment between states, that is also lacking. We have major rivers flowing through multiple states. We are fighting. The Kaveri water issue is an eye-opener. 25,000 crores is the estimated loss of revenue for Bangalore City IT Park, because it had to be closed in 2016. There were riots in Bangalore for a couple of days and everything came to a standstill. India cannot afford 25,000 crore loss because of riots, and that too on water, on Kaveri. We do not have any alignment between states when it comes to green development. Biodiversity does not know state boundaries. It does not know national boundaries. The tiger is going to the tiger in Sundarban is going to walk into some other state, and it's going to be for him it's going to be its own habitat. And finally, ecological restoration as a national policy. We do not have it as a national policy. States, it is left to the states to think about what kind of conservation they want. But conservation is not the way ahead. We need restoration. Conservation is something which must be done, but it is not sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient for that. And it automatically tells us what is not sustainable. Urbanization, for example, is not sustainable. We are building economic islands. Mumbai, Bangalore, Pune are economic islands. It's attracting people from rural India. It is taking away the focus of developing rural India and concentrating on how to make more metro in Pune and how to make more SEZs in Pune. That's not going to work. Global resource flows, current agrarian growth. There are so many things which are going to be looking. So here, I'll just stop with the Herman Daly principles of ecological economics. The rate of consumption of renewable natural resources must be less than the rate of their regeneration. Now, some of these seem utopian, but they are nevertheless guiding principles of how we can go ahead. Consumption of non-renewable resources must be less than the rate of substitution by renewable resources. Now, this is a very simple principle, but that which makes you focus on how you can get this into action. And emission and pollution of waste must be slower than the assimilative capacity of natural ecosystem. The rivers, for example, the rivers have a natural way of purifying themselves, but the amount of sewage that we are dumping, that natural limit is broken down. You just simply cannot do that. So it tells us that you need to look at renewable materials, renewable energy, circularity, low carbon technologies, local consumption, and frugal use of non-renewable resources. That is the only way ahead. So with that last slide, I'm going to stop and I'm going to hand it over back to Aditi.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the 2 talks for the day. I now request Professor Amitav Malik to share his concluding remarks on green development.
Yeah, thank you. Must thank Dr. Gurdas Nulkar and Dr. Izaz Chani for wonderful introduction, wonderful analysis of all that we are trying to do. Dr. Hani, you are right. Green financing is going to be a challenge, although things are happening. And yes, very rightly said, the energy agenda, which now President Biden has taken up, is going to be an important part, because unless we are able to shift to renewable energy very rapidly and very quickly, I think there is no way we can go green. Right now, for India, we are almost 65-70% of the fossil fuel use. That has to come down to something like 25% in less than 10-20 years. Huge challenges. Dr. Gurdas, for a fantastic comprehensive coverage, always the professor. I enjoyed the complete package that you put together. It only brings out how difficult it is to do what we are bound to do, we are committed to do in India, because without that, it's catastrophic. So, thank you for bringing out, without calling it urgent, bringing out the real urgency of many things that must happen. Interesting things before I hand over to Aditi. We now have the ESG criteria, the environment, social, and governance criteria, which all the financiers are looking at. We also have an interesting case recently reported where the green financing French company, Amundi, they threatened the resale or taking back the 5,000 crore that they had given to Adani Enterprises, and which actually was meant for mining. So these kind of checks and balances are emerging. I think overall awareness is emerging, but the gap between what is there today and what must be there within the next 10, 15 years is pretty large. So I don't want to sound pessimistic. I think we have to be optimistic. Many things are happening and they set the tone. In fact, the kind of renewable energy targets that we have set for ourselves are very promising. The kind of circular economy models that many industries are following up, very promising. Industries themselves have realized that they have to go carbon neutral, net carbon neutral by 2050. Major industries are taking initiative to look at what can be done. We at PIC had also proposed last year how metropolitan vision can be converted into net carbon neutrality by 2030. All this thinking and planning, analyzing is helping us understand how to do things, also understand that things are doable, and therefore now it's an awareness at a different level actually. So I think I'll conclude here by saying that this has been very educative, very fantastic, and I'll hand over to Aditi so we can have the balance time for Q&A. Thank you very much, everybody. Namaskar. Yes, Aditi.
Thank you, Professor Malik. We will now start with the Q&A session. We have got quite a few questions in the very good response to all the presentations and also questions on the chat box. So I'll start with the first question which was asked, which is for Dr. Ghani. Is it that India alone needs to do, or rich countries or so-called developed countries like US who have maximum emissions should do work more about GHG emissions?
Sorry, say that again.
So given that India is not responsible for many GHG emissions, whereas rich or developed countries have maximum contribution to GHG, so what should be the role of each country in realizing climate goals?
Yeah, the answer to that question is given in the talk by Guru Das, which is environment is plagued by the free rider problem within the country or globally. So there is a free rider problem existing that although Europe and USA emit a huge amount of pollution per capita compared to Africa and India, they are all trying to impose restrictions on additional emission coming from the industries. And India is saying that, no, you're going to just stop the growth. You know, a good solution for this is to impose green taxes, controlling for the per capita income, and controlling for the per capita emission, which is much higher in USA than in India. So after a global average of per capita emission, global average, you impose a tax. And that tax revenue will go into a global environment, which can then subsidize India, Uganda, and others. This overcomes the free rider problem. And this overcomes the distortions in the factor markets. But this is still to be debated. I mean, I hope Mr. Biden can take this up in the Paris Climate Agreement and come up with a proposal that will overcome the free rider problem and prevent all the countries using bilateral taxes and subsidies to control it, and instead go for a global agreement which will tax developed countries which have per capita emissions much higher than developing countries, and cross-subsidize the developing countries to come up with a green growth agenda.
Thank you, sir. Next question.
If I may just add
Yes.
one part to it,
Yes.
just to take ahead what Dr. Ijaz just said. The second thing which is missing out right now is international courts of climate justice. We have no mechanism to go against somebody, the developed countries, if they're not doing something which is like a responsible citizen of the planet. So this is something which is very squarely missing in the international courts right now. That I think is something which is important.
Thank you. Very important.
Yes. The additional question to that was, what at individual level, what can we do instead of waiting for someone to include it in government about the environmental issues?
May I answer this question?
Yes, please.
You know, one of the questions that was raised about, jobless growth, and I've been thinking about the green jobs agenda. And all of the presentation by Gurudas showed that the huge distortions in fertilizer, gas, water, they're all being grabbed by existing, interests and enterprises. So in our work, we found that the number of new enterprises being established in India is too low. They have no access to capital or water and other things. The second thing we found is that most jobs are created by new enterprises, not by existing enterprises. So if we remove all these distortions that is leading to, no job creation and bad environment, and promote green entrepreneurship, that will also promote green jobs. And all the suggestions are there in Gurudas's thing, which can be transformed into the green jobs agenda. I hope PICS will organize a future seminar on the green jobs agenda, where we can bring in. So as an individual, you can become a green entrepreneur.
That's a very useful and practical suggestion. Thank you. Next question. The first two questions were from Mr. Narendra Paul. The next one is from Vilas Rajwade. He thanks for the wonderful presentations and asks, environmental upgradation and job-related economic growth, could both of you give the top 5 recommendations according to your experience for environmental upgradation of policies and how to obtain green jobs in green job-related economic growth?
If I may start, Dr. Ijaz. So I think one of the first things which I said is that we need to have a national policy on ecological restoration. Once that is in place, it automatically gives rise to a whole lot of green jobs. Right? So there are restoration economy. In fact, some time back, George Bush commented that a very big potential for creating jobs is the ecological restoration economy, which must develop in United States of America. I think that India has a far greater potential because we are a mega diverse country. We have ecosystems which don't exist in many other places. These need to be conserved. We have species which don't exist in other places. We have a diversity in physical factors as well as biological factors. So there is a huge potential of creating green jobs there. That is the first point. Second is to actually incentivize low carbon technologies, low carbon research and development, low carbon financing, all of these things which Dr. Ijaz said earlier in his speech, as well as what Professor Amitabh Malik was implying in his opening speech. So these are the two things which you have to have a push and a pull approach to creating these new green sector.
Dr. Ghani, would you like to add any more?
I remind me the question again.
Sure. So what would be your top suggestions for upgrading environmental policy and green jobs related economic growth?
Okay. Very good question. And, I've already said that the jobs are being created by new enterprises. So why has the rate of entrepreneurship and rate of job creation been so low? So again, once with Harvard Business School, we examined this in 600 districts and asked, which districts had more entrepreneurship and more jobs and which districts and states did not. We threw in thousands of explanatory variables. Two things stood out. Those districts in India which invested more in education and physical infrastructure created many more new enterprises, more entrepreneurs. So what Gurudas was saying, invest in primary education. We can dig deeper into the, which aspect of education, which aspect of physical infrastructure is needed. These will be the two key drivers of jobs in the future. But as India scales up and doubles up infrastructure both human and physical, it has to ask what are the least cost policy options for green growth. And it is going to happen in rural areas. That's where it's going to expand. So we have to really home in and say what can be done to promote green growth with, scaling up investments in rural areas. And that's where I think we need to get rid of the free rider problem that Gurudas talked about. We highlighted land market distortions in rural areas. There are distortions in water markets, fertilizer markets, forestry markets, all of this. I'm not saying markets will solve the problem. We also need policy coordination, both at the global level and local level. And they're all focused on socially inclusive growth, poverty alleviation, gender equality. So all in all, green growth is job creation, socially inclusive. We just need to act now to achieve it.
Yeah, again, just putting an addition to that point is something which is very specific to India, and that our energy and water pricing is fictitiously low. It does not account for the real depletion cost. It does not account for the cost of exhaustion. And these are some things which this has been in discussion for such a long time in India, fictitiously low pricing of electricity as well as water, but nothing has been being done upon it. And therefore, it's very easy to frivolously use water as well as electricity in India.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Malik sir, would you like to comment anything about the top suggestions for energy?
No, actually, if you are not taking any more questions, I have a few observations to make.
Yes, sir. You please make your observations. We'll continue the questions later. There are a few more questions from the audience.
Then let us go through the question. I'll speak last.
Sure, sir. So next question is by Mr. Ashok Kaushal. Biofuels are used even today for cooking. They are the cheapest fuels available in the rural segment, but least energy efficient and play a substantial role in worsening air quality. If tomorrow attention moves to rural area, what are the options available wherein we have high level of poverty and wherein we have high level of poverty and worsened, which is worsened further by COVID-19. So what options can we give them for cooking fuels, which they are using currently, given the poverty scenario, which might be exaggerated if we consider rural areas?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
So I grew up in Siwan, Bihar. And in my kitchen, I would see my mother sitting there whole day using coal and biofuel. You know, as a child, I used to see her. And here in Delhi and Washington, D.C., I have oven and other things. Just scale up the rural infrastructure investments. They have no access to energy. You know, if you want to avoid air pollution, make my mother have access to the rural physical infrastructure. Don't let her get polluted. I still wonder how much of gas she took sitting whole day cooking in the kitchen.
I just want to say that, Ashok Kausal's question, when he talks of biofuels are used even today for cooking, I'm assuming he means wood and twigs, because biofuels are an industrial product and that's not distributed in rural India. So biofuels mean something else. They are made of, from Jatropa or Karanza, traditional ways of making that. But that is going to eat. Yeah, but that the only flip point of that, it's going to reduce the land under food. By diverting land under food to land land for making biofuels.
So that fortunately that is reducing slowly, gradually. Yeah. Next question, Aditi.
Next question is by Pradeep Gupta. He firstly congratulates for the great overview by the speakers, and he's asking, are we on the right track for, I think by preserving he means for decarbonization, like getting away from fossil fuels, and are we truly working in a less carbon zone? So the lecture already highlighted.
Yeah, I think they are generic questions.
Yeah,
there are no direct answers.
okay.
Yeah, go to the next.
But the issues which were discussed right now, so they remain the same. One question by Kapil Agarwal is, can developed countries also focus on decreasing consumption instead of just green taxation? Maybe both of you could answer this.
Go ahead, sir.
Dr. Yuzaz, would you like to respond?
No, I don't have anything. Sorry.
Okay. Gurudas, please.
Gurudas.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the. Are you able to hear me? Because I can see that.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. That really is the way forward, so decreasing consumption instead of just green taxation. And that's also what I said, frivolous use of natural resources. Just take a city like Las Vegas. The amount of electricity that Las Vegas consumes will be able to support several hundred villages in India. So the kind of electricity that we are wasting in entertainment is simply obnoxious in developed countries. So that is definitely the way out. That's supposed to be the first thing that you can do.
Yeah, I'll also like to add that just by increasing the energy efficiency, we can reduce our demand by more than 50%. Everybody, not just we in developing country, but also the developed country. Yeah. You're on mute, Aditi.
Yes. The next question. Yes. The next question is from Neeti Sarwan for Gurudas sir. In your opinion, what is the best way that social enterprises can act upon to align with green restoration economy, especially ones working on forestry and local communities?
Okay, so I'm assuming that when you say social enterprises, you mean enterprises which are less for profit and more for social good, right? That unfortunately is not the way ahead. The way ahead is for the profit-making enterprises to get into the restoration economy. If there is profit in the restoration, only then will there be people, more supply of the goods and services which are required for restoration economy. Unfortunately, we are still looking at NGOs, social sector, developmental sector to get into the work of restoration. But that's just buying your time. That's we're just losing time on that. We have to get it mainstreamed. It has to be a profit-based economy which is driving restoration.
I mean, if I may add to this, Gurudas is right about, the profitable enterprises, but there's also a role for social awareness. I see my wife beating me up if I don't do my waste management well. So, having more social awareness of how we manage waste management, how we preserve, this kind of social awareness through community, through gender equality, is something which we can be promoted through just pure advertisements and education. So there is some role for it, and the social group should continue doing that work, scale it up even more.
Just a continuation of both your answers, there is a question by Soumya. In what ways can private sector be motivated to mobilize funds towards green development? Dr. Ejaz? So you're on mute yet?
You're on mute.
The question is, in what ways can enterprises be motivated to
mobilize funds towards green development or green measures?
Towards
green development measures.
Green development, yes. I mean, one answer within India is to undo what Gurudas has made a long list of 12 ministries. In my view, they are all related to factor market distortions, subsidies and taxes because of vested interests of enterprises and states. One way to get rid of this is to remove distortions. So free market has a role to play. Just no subsidies, let the market decide. But free markets will not solve the problem by itself. We also need some policy coordination within India, between center and states, between public and private sector, and globally between Biden and Mr. Modi, so that countries with low per capita energy are not being taken for a ride by high income. So we need to have improved market competition and improved policy coordination. And all of this can be achieved through increased social awareness by seminars like this.
Thank you.
I have a quick addition to just extension of Dr. Ejaz's thing.
Yes.
If you really want to make the free markets work towards green development, then they have to be perfect markets. Unfortunately, none of our markets are perfect. And one of the biggest imperfections of the market is information asymmetry, which has been discussed since the times of Joseph Stiglitz and George Akerlof. Take a simple thing, so if every product you're made to put the carbon footprint and the water footprint, that removes the information asymmetry to a large extent. If I see, let's say, a bottle of shampoo with a water footprint of 10,000 liters and a bottle of shampoo with water footprint of 5,000 liters, I'm sure there'll be so many of us right now in this room who would want to buy something which is environmentally better. But today we do not have the means of figuring out which is environmentally better and which is not. And that is the imperfection in the free market. If that imperfection is, we are able to remove that, then certainly there is a lot of there will be many consumers who will take the route of environmentally better products.
If I may add just one more thing, I mean, I see over the next 10 years huge optimism from green growth. Every large multinational is going for innovative technology to become more efficient. And this human awareness that we want green growth is already seen. I can see a huge FDI investment coming into India on green growth with improved technology. So I would be optimistic. I mean, my concern is that it may be blocked.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's one question from Vilas Rajwade.
And
One sec, let me go.
Dr. Kelkar may also want to say something.
Yeah,
Dr. Kelkar?
Yes, sir,
Yeah.
please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course, yes. Please.
First, I want to thank our both distinguished speakers, Dr. Ghani and Dr. Nulkar, for really very, very lucid presentation. One issue which didn't come up, obviously, because of time constraint, is which will help our focus our minds much more on the policy choices, is showing that because of the deterioration of our environment, the new natural disasters are increasing. Take, for instance, Western India. The number of the typhoons now, which are affecting Western India, happened in my memory last 75 years. And that's because of warming of the Arabian Sea.
Okay.
So just the COVID has helped us to focus on the importance of health. I think we should also try to focus people's attention. What are the dangers which are very imminent and growing? And we have much more urgent reasons, urgent actions have to be taken. So that could be perhaps, and as Izaz was saying, maybe we could have a series of one on green jobs and one could be on the environment disasters as a sort of cautionary tale that what is present you can't continue. I mean, just not on. So maybe that's the one issue which we should take up to really persuade people like me. I'm an uninformed economist, but I can see the dangers from what's happening. So it will persuade me, just like COVID has persuaded me that how we were wrong and neglecting public health. So I think it will help us to focus our mind. We'll get much larger traction and support to this also. So maybe we should have a separate session on this, Professor. Thank you very much. Once again, really flying start for this new year for green growth year. And I really want to thank again both of our distinguished speakers.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kelkar. Aditi, I think we can take some of the questions offline on. So if I may conclude, it's coming to 7:15 here. So just to conclude what Dr. Kelkar was saying and to add to that, yesterday at this time I was attending another web conference on ecology of Himalayan system that was organized by Dr. Anupam Saraf, another member of the Climate Collective. And what that brought out was fantastic. But what took my breath away was a comment by a young Nepali researchers. He said, "ये सब कुछ तो होगा, कभी ना कभी तो होगा, होना ही पड़ेगा। कब होगा? जब इंसान को समझ में आएगा कि अंदर से समझ में आएगा कि पैसा सब कुछ नहीं है." In short, he said, when mankind realize that money is not everything and there are other values. So he was talking about the, even spiritual values, being in Himalayas, being in mountains. He says, we are causing such devastation to the mountains. We will have no water, we will have no clean air. That's the future that we are working for our children and grandchildren. It was very impassionate plea by the researcher, young researcher, probably hardly 35-year-old. But what opened my mind is that he's right. I think we, the people, have to change our priorities, remember our real values. Then things will change much faster. And I think the youth is the hope because they are capable of thinking differently. They are capable of thinking out of the box. And we hope that the youth will take us to the right direction very fast. I'll conclude here. And Aditi, back to you for your thanks. Vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just 1 second. Okay. So it has been a very enlightening session with insightful talks, and all of us will be leaving with more enthusiasm and better understanding on green development today. I thank our speakers, Dr. Ejaz Ghani and Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, for the very insightful talks, and Professor Amitabh Malik for chairing the session and a thought-provoking message. I also thank Dr. Vijay Kerkar for the concluding remarks. We thank President PIC Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar and Vice President Dr. Kerkar for their incessant support and help. We thank the Director, Associate Director and all PIC staff. I thank my colleagues Prithviraj, Siddharth and Soumya for the event organization, and a big thanks to all the audience for participating and joining us for these World Environment Day 2021 celebrations. We hope to stay connected for climate action. See you soon. Thank you. We'll sign off now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Prithvi, we can close the meeting.